June 15, 1943. 25,000 feet above the English Channel, the sky was cold, thin, and merciless. German ace Klaus Brenner leaned forward in his Messerschmitt's cockpit, squinting through the canopy at the shapes forming ahead of him. 8 American P-47 Thunderbolts. Big, fat, slow. The Luftwaffe pilots had a nickname for them: flying milk bottles. Brenner smirked. He had hunted these aircraft for months. They climbed like overloaded freight trains, barely clawing their way upward while his Bf-109 ruled the vertical sky. This would be easy. Another tally mark. Another victory to report when he landed. He rolled his aircraft into a clean, confident dive, the kind practiced so many times it felt automatic. Then something happened that made no sense. The lead Thunderbolt didn't turn away. It didn't dive. Instead, it pitched up, hard. Aggressively. Unnaturally. The massive aircraft surged upward, its engine screaming, climbing faster than Luftwaffe intelligence said was possible. Brenner pulled back instinctively, but the American fighter followed him into the vertical, clawing toward him at nearly 2,000 feet per minute. In the tight cockpit, for the first time that morning, Brenner felt fear. 13 feet of thick, paddle-shaped propeller blades were tearing at the thin air, transforming the sky's biggest joke into something terrifying. Back on the ground, the story of the P-47 looked very different. Morning reports from the European theater were brutal. By September 1943, American pilots openly hated the Thunderbolt. Some requested transfers to anything else with wings. Luftwaffe pilots mocked it openly, and the nickname Jug echoed through Allied briefing rooms with bitter irony. At Wright Field in Ohio, Colonel James Johnson flipped through combat assessments as his coffee went cold. Numbers didn't lie. A climb rate of 1,500 feet per minute made the P-47 an easy target against German fighters that could climb twice as fast. German pilots simply climbed above them and struck at will. The Thunderbolt was powerful, armored, and tough, but air combat wasn't decided by toughness. It was decided by altitude and energy. While commanders saw failure, an engineer named Frank Caldwell saw physics. In a cramped office at Hamilton Standard, he studied the same reports and felt something click into place. The P-47's Pratt & Whitney R-2800 engine produced more power than any fighter engine in the world, 2,300 horsepower. Yet that power was being wasted. The problem wasn't the engine. It wasn't even the airframe. It was the propeller. Narrow, knife-like blades designed for efficiency at cruise speeds simply couldn't absorb that much torque. At full power, the tips went nearly supersonic, creating shock waves that destroyed lift. The propeller wasn't pulling the aircraft forward anymore. It was dragging it back. Caldwell's idea violated everything conventional aviation design stood for. Forget elegance. Forget efficiency. He imagined thick, broad, paddle-shaped blades that grabbed huge volumes of air and hurled it backward by brute force. It looked more like a ship's propeller than anything meant to fly. When he presented the concept, his colleagues listened politely and shook their heads. It would be heavier. It would create drag. It would be expensive. Retooling factories in wartime was madness. Curtiss Electric, Hamilton's main rival, dismissed the idea entirely and pushed a refined version of the old narrow-blade design. Safer. Cheaper. Familiar. The Army Air Forces stood at a crossroads. Incremental improvement or radical change. Colonel Johnson knew the decision would cost lives either way. Across the Atlantic, German intelligence officers were confident. They had examined captured Thunderbolts and dismissed them as crude American machines, big, heavy, unsophisticated. German pilots joked that shooting one down was like hunting a flying refrigerator. The Americans could build many aircraft, yes, but they couldn't build better ones. Or so the Luftwaffe believed. In September, Caldwell's vision took physical form. A single P-47 sat on the right field flight line, its massive propeller looking almost ridiculous. Test pilot Captain Robert Anderson climbed aboard, unaware he was about to help rewrite air combat history. The first flight lasted 14 minutes before violent vibrations forced him down. The aircraft nearly shook itself apart. Caldwell wasn't surprised. Massive blades meant massive forces. The next 3 weeks were spent redesigning hubs, forging new blade routes, and reinforcing the nose. Weight increased. Complexity exploded. But the idea survived. The second test flight was worse in a different way. The vibration was gone, but so was the performance. The climb rate barely improved. Speed gains were marginal. Curtiss Electric wasted no time sending their superior test numbers to Colonel Johnson. To many, Caldwell's project looked dead. But Caldwell refused to let it go. The math was sound. The concept was right. The problem lay in pitch control. The constant speed systems had been designed for narrow blades. Paddle blades needed far more adjustment. Working 18-hour days, Caldwell's team rebuilt the propeller governor from scratch. They expanded the pitch range dramatically, allowing coarse settings for speed and ultrafine settings for climb and dive recovery. Cooling problems followed. Engine temperatures soared. Cowling intakes were redesigned. Louvers were added. Every fix created another problem. Meanwhile, Pentagon officials whispered about canceling the P-47 entirely in favor of the promising P-51 Mustang. Then, on December 8th, everything changed. Anderson took the modified Thunderbolt skyward once more. This time, the aircraft climbed to 20,000 feet in just over 10 minutes. At altitude, it reached 445 miles per hour. More astonishing still, it pulled out of dives with authority no Thunderbolt had ever shown before. The paddle blades didn't just add speed. They gave control, energy, options. German intelligence dismissed the reports. Even improved, the P-47 was still inferior, so they claimed. Colonel Johnson disagreed. He authorized limited production. 50 propellers. A gamble. Hamilton Standard worked through Christmas. Costs doubled. Manufacturing slowed. But by early 1944, the first paddleblade Thunderbolts crossed the Atlantic. At RAF Box Ted, veteran pilots eyed the new propellers with suspicion. They looked wrong. Oversized. Ugly. Some pilots refused to fly them. Orders overruled fear. The first combat mission came on March 22 over Berlin. When German fighters dove from above, the Thunderbolts did something unthinkable. They climbed to meet them. The engagement lasted minutes. German pilots survived long enough to report something impossible. The Americans could climb with them now. Losses mounted. Tactics failed. Captured aircraft revealed uncomfortable truths. American metallurgy and manufacturing precision had leapt ahead. By May, paddleblade Thunderbolts dominated Western Europe. Victory rates soared. Losses fell. The Luftwaffe's altitude advantage, its greatest weapon, was gone. On June 6, 1944, nearly 400 paddleblade P-47s roared over Normandy. They climbed effortlessly, patrolling skies the Luftwaffe could no longer contest. German pilots were forced low, where Thunderbolt armor and firepower were deadly. By day's end, the numbers told the story. 14,000 Allied sorties. Fewer than 300 German. The air war was over. When the war ended, over 12,000 paddleblade propellers had been built. The P-47's kill ratio had tripled. Thousands of pilots lived who would not have otherwise. German intelligence files admitted the truth. The Americans had solved a problem Germany could not. Power had finally been turned into dominance. Frank Caldwell received a medal, quietly. He knew the real victory belonged to the pilots who came home. His ungainly propeller reshaped aviation, industry, and warfare itself. 13 feet of steel proved that sometimes effectiveness mattered more than elegance, and that daring to break the rules could change the course of history.